Coming up on The World Today. It's a race for votes in the last few hours before the U.S. elections for Donald Trump and Joe Biden hitting the campaign trail in battleground states. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson raises concern over COVID-19 deaths that they could be twice as high over the winter. Plus, 19 people killed in an attack in Kabul University. A warm welcome to the program today. I'm Akaite Afia here in Lagos, Nigeria. It's less than 24 hours to the elections in the United States, and the presidential candidates have been making last-minute campaigns at battleground states. Let's take a look at the U.S. President Donald Trump, who attempted to visit 5 states on Sunday. Today, he's making a stop in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It is one of the states that could prove key to the election results back in 2016. It went to Trump in a surprise win. This year, however, polls project a 5% lead for Joe Biden. Speaking of Joe Biden, the Democratic challenger, he has been making a specific bid for Black support. On Sunday, he was in Philadelphia to take part in a Souls to Polls event, which aimed at encouraging Black churchgoers to vote. And he referenced how the coronavirus pandemic has impacted on Black people.
This is the most important election of our lifetimes. We're at an inflection point. So we have to vote like we never did before. Every day. Every day is a new reminder of how high the stakes are, of how far the other side will go to try to suppress the turnout, especially here in Philadelphia. President Trump is terrified of what will happen in Pennsylvania. He knows that the people of Pennsylvania get to have their say. If you have your say, he doesn't stand a chance.
I just left a state that locked down. I left 2 of them, and they're not happy about it, I'll tell you right now. You know what's going to happen to them on November 4th, the day after? They're going to say, all right, we'll open up now. That's why they're locking down. But we're going to have a safe vaccine that ends the pandemic. Without it, it's rounding the turn. I say it drives them crazy. It's rounding the turn. Because all they want to do, you turn on the news, COVID, 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 COVID. We'd like to talk about COVID, and then next turn. Here's what happens, November 4th. You won't hear too much about it. You won't hear too much about it.
Well, let's talk to Channels Television's Washington correspondent, Maria Byrd, on the last-minute preparations for the U.S. election. Maria, thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
So, can you talk to us about what the key message has been at the battleground states for both Donald Trump and Joe Biden?
The key message has really been for Donald Trump around don't allow the fear to stop you from voting for him. I mean, if you hear him talking about COVID-19 and the fact that it's not what they believe that Democrats are making it out to be, if you hear him talking about, getting out to the polls, if you hear him, his messaging around the economy being stronger, all the things that people want to hear in order to know that they will be safe within a Trump administration. And he's at these battleground states, some of which are traditionally red, which I think he knows that just due to what's been happening and with the pandemic, that these states might potentially go blue. You're going to hear Joe Biden talk a lot about not having a fit president, about President Trump not being fit, and all of the failures that occurred as a result of the coronavirus hitting the U.S. You'll also hear him talk much about kind of the compassion. He's going to really focus on connecting in with the American people, because they say that's where he has a strong point with his connection and his relationships and being able to really communicate in a way that allows people to see him as a person and see themselves in him.
Well, more than 90 people have voted in early voting, and it's the first time that this has ever happened. So can you tell us a little bit about how Americans feel about these elections? Could it have anything to do with all of the enlightenment on the importance of the elections? And does it have anything to do with the candidates?
Well, when you see these type of numbers, we know that these are individuals that are looking for either they're looking for change or they're afraid of change and they don't want to see change. And so you're seeing that this country is very committed to either one party or the other. And it could be they're voting for Joe Biden because they are anti the Trump administration. Or it could be that they really believe in the ideals of Joe Biden. And then those who are voting for President Trump might not necessarily believe in all the Republican values, but they believe that President Trump has been what's best for the country, and they're looking for something different than status quo as usual. We can go back to 1857, where we saw 82% of the people that went to vote, but we have not seen this type of very clear indicators that it's time to get out to vote since the end of Reconstruction.
Well, Maria, I'm sure there are still a number of undecided voters out there, people still unsure who they'll be voting for now. So how much of an impact does this set of people have on the final results after Election Day?
For those undecided voters, you're exactly right. This will have a major impact. We have very few undecided voters when you look at the larger scale, as you mentioned before, having so many 90 million out that have already gone to vote. I mean, we're a country of just over 300 million, about 380 million. So when you look at those type of numbers, you know that there's a very small percentage of individuals that have not quite made their decision, but their decision is going to be clearly made on their personal feelings about this administration. It's going to go way beyond politics. This is going to be about how they feel personally and what has resonated with them as an individual and their families.
And about those battleground states, how are the candidates doing there? What are you hearing and seeing, Maria?
Well, Arizona is one that I think is potentially going to see itself swing. I mean, when we look at the individuals, when you look at what John McCain's wife has done, she's very clearly a Joe Biden supporter. She is saying that she is not a part of what the Trump administration has stood for, and she was a Republican. Her husband was a Republican in Congress, and so we know that when you have individuals in the Republican Party that have come out to speak against the president and to speak in support of Joe Biden, that it is clear that we could potentially see, Ohio. I mean, they've said Arizona, Ohio, if those two states go blue, then they're predicting that that's where the actual election will end up and where the actual results will end up, and that will be the winner for this election season. But we've seen various things happen before. There's no speculating. I think that the real focus is that whoever you're supporting, people are saying get out to vote, because every single vote is going to matter in this election, where as we've talked about before, Hillary Clinton was ahead in 2016 according to the polls, but again, she still did not win the Electoral College, which then did not allow her to win the presidency. And so I think people are very much concerned about that, and they're saying that they have to get out to vote in order to ensure that their candidate has a viable chance of winning this election.
Well, Maria, this is an unprecedented election holding in the middle of a pandemic. So, of course, concerns are high as to safety at the polls. And we have seen the presidential candidates taking a swipe at each other based on their approach to the pandemic. So what are the protocols for the polls? And what is all this talk about the president firing Dr. Anthony Fauci?
Well, Dr. Anthony Fauci, we know, has been with him since the beginning. I think that we'll see something different come out in the next couple of days in regards to that. I mean, Anthony Fauci has been with the U.S. I mean, when you think about the HIV virus, I mean, he has dealt with some very serious infectious H1N1, various infectious diseases across the country in his career span. And so we're going to see that we're probably going to continue to hear from him in that regard. But again, we know that the president has not been happy with some of what has come out of some of the interviews that he's done. But when you talk about some of the guidelines that are being held at the polling stations, they're being sanitized. Many of the computer-operated stations for voting are being sanitized. You are required to wear masks. You're required to stand 6 feet distance when you're standing in line to go to vote. Obviously, many individuals have done the mail-in ballots and mail-in voting. Mail-in voting has become one of the key indicators and one of the most important ways in which people have decided to vote, especially those who are concerned about the health ramifications of going to an actual polling station. And so we're going to probably see that on Tuesday, just because there's such a high number of individuals that have done early voting, we'll probably see some lines, but they will again be those undecided voters who are kind of just trying to see where they're going to stand when it gets to tomorrow's actual election day. But we probably will not see the type of lines. We've had various super centers opened. Many of the sports arenas are open for voting, which means you have very large facilities where people can space out and the lines can be clearly spaced out without causing too much of outside lines in front of the various polling stations. And so there's been a lot of work around ensuring the safety and protection. And there have been a lot of young people. So we know traditionally poll workers are elderly, but the young people, those college students, have taken up the mantle, and they have said that they will be poll workers to ensure that the safety of the elderly community is there, so they don't have to go out to be poll workers during the pandemic season.
Well, Maria, we're almost at Election Day there, so we'll definitely be watching. You please do stay safe out there.
Thank you so much.
Meanwhile, in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has warned coronavirus deaths could be twice as high over the winter as they were in the first wave of the pandemic. This comes as Mr. Johnson seeks support for a 4-week lockdown beginning Thursday across the country. Labour says it will back the lockdown, but criticized the delay. Mr. Johnson is addressing the House of Commons today, where he is expected to explain that scientists suggest that unless action is taken now, that there could be more deaths over the winter that are twice as bad or more compared with the first wave. Well, the number of coronavirus cases around the world has risen to over 45.9 million, with the death toll reaching over 1.19 million. According to the WHO Coronavirus Disease Dashboard, the number of cases in the Americas made up nearly half of the global total, to reach 20,477,535. However, Europe and Southeast Asia reported more than 11.06 million and 9.25 million cases. Here's the global update.
With beds around 70% occupied, hospitals in the Czech Republic have turned to volunteers to free up full-time health workers to care for more seriously ill patients. The government in October imposed tough restrictions, including school closures, a curfew, and shutting bars and restaurants to limit social contact after officials warned hospital capacity could run out in November. As of Friday, almost 3,000 doctors and 7,400 nurses were out of action due to COVID-19, up from around 600 and 1,000 respectively at the beginning of October. Meanwhile, the Italian government is going to tighten restrictions to limit the spread of the coronavirus, but is holding back from reintroducing a blanket nationwide lockdown. While addressing Parliament, the Prime Minister says more stringent measures, including curbing travel in the worst-hit regions and introducing a nighttime curfew, are now needed, given the recent resurgence of the virus.
Unfortunately, also museums and exhibitions will be closed. We are looking at reducing to 50% the limit to the capacity of all local public transport. And finally, we're looking at introducing limits to the movement of people to and from regions with a high-risk level, except in cases of people traveling for proven work purposes or health and education reasons.
He also warned that intensive care units will be overwhelmed in 15 of Italy's 20 regions by next month unless action was taken, and said certain places face tougher restrictions than others. In Spain, Madrid municipal police raided 81 illegal parties, 18 drinking sessions known in Spain as botelones, and 10 bars which broke restrictions designed to curb the rise in COVID-19 cases. Many partygoers were not observing social distancing or wearing masks. The raids took place on November the 1st across the Spanish capital, and officers found bars still open after the midnight curfew imposed on the capital. Spain imposed a 6-month state of emergency last week, enabling it to enforce measures aimed at trying to reduce the soaring rate of coronavirus infections. Finally, the World Health Organization Director General has announced that he is in quarantine after coming into contact with someone who has tested positive for COVID-19. Mr. Tedros wrote in a tweet that he is well without symptoms, but will have to self-quarantine in line with WHO protocols. During his quarantine, he'll work from home.
Coming up after the break. Sights that take your breath away. We're talking about the Machu Picchu in Peru. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. As we mentioned before the break, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has warned coronavirus deaths could be twice as high over the winter as they were in the first wave of the pandemic. Mr. Johnson is set to address the House of Commons today. Channels Television's London correspondent Juliana Olayinka joins us now via Skype. Juliana, welcome to the program.
Good afternoon.
So we understand that the PM will be addressing the Parliament later. What can we expect from this meeting?
Well, actually, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has been addressing MPs in the House of Commons for about an hour and a half. It's a pretty hostile environment, I've got to say. He's been taking questions from about 15 to 20 MPs. Looking at the list, there are about 100 MPs that want to ask Boris Johnson about this looming lockdown that is going to last for a month. And Boris Johnson started the statement really trying to justify what some MPs considered to be the final death blow for tens of thousands of businesses up and down England. On Saturday, he delivered that televised address, really confirming the inevitable that coronavirus cases in the UK are completely out of control at the moment. We'd always been very worried about the winter and whether or not the NHS will be able to cope, and it appears as if he's got to the last point. Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition Labour Party, was very quick to stand up and criticise Prime Minister Boris Johnson. On September the 21st, which was about 40 days ago, the government decided to dismiss their own sage scientific advice. At that time, I believe we weren't at the peak of the second wave. There were about 11 deaths per day. There were about 2,000 positive COVID cases. 40 days later, there were over 300 deaths a day, and there were over 20,000 positive COVID cases being recorded. And the question remains, why did it take so long? Why did Boris Johnson once again not learn the lessons from the first lockdown and take so long to deliver what he's been doing? So there are lots of questions flying about, of course, because there have been so many different restrictions. MPs in the House of Commons have to decide whether or not we will be going into a lockdown on Thursday. That vote will happen on Wednesday, and we're expecting it to pass because, as I said, the Labour leader is very, very much for this lockdown, and Labour will be supporting the government's decision on this.
Well, I guess we will be watching to see how that does play out. Juliana, thanks so much for joining us today, and please stay safe out there.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, schools are resuming all across France and holding a minute's silence in memory of school teacher Samuel Paty, who was beheaded by a Chechen teenager who wanted to avenge his use of cartoons mocking the Prophet Muhammad during a class on freedom of expression. Schools were closed for 2 weeks for the fall break. Today, Prime Minister Jean Castex visited Paty's Les Bois Middle School to pay homage to the teacher. He informs that all police services have been mobilized, not only national police, but also municipal police. This is due to concerns over security and immigration, which have increased in France following a fatal knife attack in Nice. France's chief anti-terrorism prosecutor has said the man suspected of carrying out the Nice attack was a Tunisian born in 1999 who had arrived in Europe on September 20th in Lampedusa, the Italian island off Tunisia. Well, we are still reeling at some of the miracles that have emerged from scenes of a massive earthquake that hit Turkey last week. One of them with the rescue of a 3-year-old girl 65 hours after a building she was in caved in due to the earthquake. Elif Perinsek, who was trapped with her mother and 3 siblings, pulled out alive by the search and rescue teams under their apartment, which was demolished by the quake. Just a while before, a 14-year-old girl was rescued, having been under the rubble for 58 hours in the city of Izmir. Video footage from the local emergency service captured the dramatic rescue of Idil Sirin. The 6.9 magnitude earthquake struck on Friday, and authorities say 79 people were killed, all in Izmir, while 2 teenagers died on the Greek island of Samos. More than 3,500 tents and 13,000 beds have been supplied to provide temporary shelter, according to Turkey's Disaster and Emergency Authority, which said 962 people had been injured in Friday's earthquake. A traditional ceremony giving thanks to the earth and a spectacular light show marked the reopening of Peru's world-famous tourist destination, Machu Picchu, on Sunday. The high-altitude UNESCO World Heritage Site, Citadel, nestled in the Andes Mountains, is on the bucket list of many tourists, but the site has been closed for months due to the lockdown imposed to halt the spread of the coronavirus. Peru's Culture Minister Alejandro Nera called the 500-year-old site the symbolic place of Peruvian culture in the world. While Sunday marks the official reopening of the site, one Japanese tourist was allowed to view the ruins earlier in October after waiting almost 7 months in the nearby town of Aguascalientes while trapped in the country during the coronavirus outbreak. Peruvian authorities say social distancing between visitors will be enforced and the number of people entering per day will be limited to 675. Prior to the pandemic, daily visits normally fell between 2,500 to 5,000 tourists. Well, I'm sure plenty of people are very excited to check that one off their bucket list. That's all for today. I'm Akaite Afia. Have a great day and stay safe.